Get started. Okay, I'll ask everyone to put their microphones on mute until it comes time for Q&A and things like that, just for the sake of the recording. Okay, welcome everybody. Today is Wednesday, May 29th, and we are here learning as part of a Denver Kehillah program. And it is a real pleasure for me to welcome Rabbi Daniel Ross Goodman, who's the author of the book we are going to be discussing tonight. Before we get to that, we will just briefly introduce Rabbi Doctor through a brief bio. I think this is still relevant. Rabbi Dr. Goodman is a postdoctoral fellow at Harvard Divinity School and a faculty of the Theology and Religious Studies Department at St. John's University. He is the author of 3 books, including the book we are going to be discussing tonight, called Soloveitchik's Children, Irving, Greenberg, David Hartman, Jonathan Sachs, and the Future of Jewish Theology in America. So, welcome, Daniel. It's really wonderful to have you, and I'm very grateful that you have agreed to do this book talk with the Denver Kehillah. And I'll just start off by saying that I am thoroughly enjoying this book. I am reading it. It's taken me a long time to read because I have to keep my finger on the place where I'm reading and my hand in the back with the footnotes, because it's hard to move past some of the things you say without getting into the footnotes and trying to understand some of the backstory and the history and some of the other characters that have been involved in this saga that you've written. It's really remarkable. For those of you who are on the call, if you have not read it yet, I urge you to. And in just a few minutes, I'm going to put a discount code in the chat, so you'll be able to buy the book with, I think, a 30% discount directly from the publisher, not from Amazon, but directly from the publisher. Of course, if you want to buy it for Amazon, you're welcome to do that as well. I would really highly recommend it. And if you do read it, please talk about it with me, because as I said, it's really wonderful. So I think we're going to get started. The method through which we'll carry out this this program is I'm going to ask Daniel a few questions as we go. And then after about 30 minutes or so, I think we'll open it up to questions from the floor or from the screen, as it may be. Of course, you're welcome to put questions in the chat. If you think of a question, you don't want to forget it, put it in the chat, and we'll make sure to check the chat as we go. And while Daniel is answering the first question, I'm going to fetch the discount code and also put it in the chat. So once again, thank you very much for joining us, Rabbi Dr. Daniel Ross Goodman. That's a lot of words to say at once. So I hope Daniel is okay. And let's start with, I guess, the perhaps most obvious question is, why did you decide to, well, my first question is, how come no one ever thought about writing this book before? It seems like a fantastic idea, and I haven't seen any genre like this. So maybe you could talk about that. But why is it that you decided to write this book? When and why and how did you become fascinated by Rabbi Soloveitchik and his students?
Well, these are great places to begin. And if I could just begin a little bit before with the beginning and say thank you to Rabbi Gelman for organizing this event. And thank you all for coming. It's really a great pleasure to be here in Denver and to see all you all, to meet all of you, and look forward to a great discussion tonight. I hope you come with plenty of questions. And yeah, how
I have to stop you there, Daniel. You said something which is a giveaway. You said all you all. Where from the South are you from?
I'm actually not from the South, maybe because the book is from the South. Maybe I've imbibed some Southern expressions because the book is published by University of Alabama Press. So maybe
Okay.
unwittingly or unbeknownst to me, I have incorporated that into my lexicon.
All right. Great.
That just came out. That was completely unintentional. I'm a total Northeastern New Englander. New, so I don't know how that came out, but maybe that was meant to be for University of Alabama Press. And
Perfect.
speaking of which, the discount code from them will be active for several weeks. So if you want to share it with your friends, colleagues, the rest of the Kahila, you're more than welcome to do that. And and of course, the book is also available on Amazon. I know people prefer sometimes ordering through Amazon, even if there's a discount elsewhere because of points and shipping or things like that. But either way, I hope you'll consider checking it out. Um, and yes, and how just before getting into those questions, I was really glad to hear that you're reading it with the footnotes at the same time as well, which you'll see on the back. Jonathan Sarna has a comment. I was thrilled to get his endorsement of the book, Professor Sarna, and he emphasized that you got to read this book with the footnotes. So I totally agree, because I put a lot of important things in the footnotes, and originally I thought when it was going to be published that it was going to be published as actual footnotes instead of endnotes. Is how they did it. You'll see really technically what they did is endnotes. When they put the notes at the end of the book instead of footnotes is when they're right under the text, because that's how I intended it to be, where you see everything all at once. So it made for, that was their house style. I couldn't do anything about that. But the recommendation is from Jonathan Sarna and for myself to have 2 bookmarks when you read it. So main text, footnotes. So
That's my recommendation too.
yes, glad we're on the same page, or literally and figuratively, about that. 2 pages at once. In any case, why did I decide to write this book? And when I first became fascinated with Rabbi Soloveitchik and his students, well, I probably decided to write it before I knew I was writing it, in the sense of that once I became fascinated with how Rabbi Soloveitchik's students, like Gitz Greenberg, were interpreting his thought in ways that I thought were very unique and very mechudishtik, as we might say, innovative ways. I thought, well, there's something really worth exploring here, because I had first become interested in Rabbi Soloveitchik when I was in MTA and YU. I went to high school at Yeshiva University High School for Boys in New York, if anyone is familiar with the YU high school. And then I went on there to college. But I actually first heard of Rabbi Soloveitchik from my shul rabbi growing up in Springfield, Massachusetts, Rabbi Gershon Sonnenschein, who was a student, one of Soloveitchik's many children, many students. It's a theme we'll probably be getting into, what it means to be a child of Rabbi Soloveitchik. So he was the one who first put this idea into my head that there was this figure called Rabbi Soloveitchik, who was really, really chashuv, really, really important in the Jewish world, in the modern Orthodox world in particular. And so when I got to MTA and YU and started hearing about him, you're not just hearing about him at MTA and YU. As I give this analogy in the book, the introduction, it's like being in Salzburg and being surrounded by Mozart. You know, if you like classical music, then you're going to hear Mozart. It's inevitable. But if you're in the actual Malcolm, you're in the actual place of Mozart, then you're just the whole place is bathed in his aura, and that's sort of like what it is to be modern Orthodox and be NYU. If you're just modern Orthodox alone in America, then Rabbi Soloveitchik is going to be a name that you hear all the time anyway, and you'll probably be countering his thought a lot. But if you're in the actual place, then it takes where he taught him, where his legacy was created and has been mostly perpetuated, then it takes on a whole nother meaning. And that's where my interest in him first began, because I've always been quite interested in Jewish thought and theology. But I never pursued it and the study of him in a specific way until I got to YCT, Yeshiva Chovei Torah, which is where I got smicha, where I earned my rabbinic degree, and I learned with Rabbi Greenberg, who, as you know, is one of the main figures, one of the main students, disciples of Rabbi Soloveitchik that I cover in the book. And I had heard of Rabbi Greenberg before, but I had no idea how much his thought, admittedly so, it was shaped by Rav Soloveitchik. But what was so fascinating to me to hear was that he was applying it in ways that were so different and so groundbreaking in comparison to the ways that I heard his thought, the ways that I heard Rabbi Soloveitchik's thought being applied in MTA and YU. So that put in my head the idea that, okay, there are different schools of thought within the interpretation of the Rav himself, of how to interpret his teachings. And then when I dug into it a little more, when I got into my PhD program and when I was thinking about what I was going to be doing my dissertation on, and the book is now growth of my doctoral dissertation, I thought, well, there's so much worth exploring between the relationship between Greenberg and Rav Soloveitchik. I thought maybe this could be a whole dissertation, because I'd already written an article on just the idea and the application of Jewish-Christian relations alone between the differences between Rav Soloveitchik and Greenberg, and how Rabbi Greenberg broke with Rabbi Soloveitchik on that topic. So I thought that there could be enough here for a whole dissertation. And that's when my dissertation advisor, Dr. Al Middleman, said, that would be a good dissertation, but if you want to make this really good dissertation and potentially even have a book out of it that would interest people in the wider world than just academia, you might want to consider expanding it to a couple of other Soloveitchik students. He said, because there's this book, he's a philosophy person, teaches Jewish philosophy, but is also quite knowledgeable in general Western philosophy. And he said, so there's this book called Heidegger's Children. I don't know if any of you are familiar with this. Heidegger's Children is a book about the 20th century German philosopher Martin Heidegger and his students in philosophy. I believe one of them includes Hannah Arendt, among some others, and how they interpreted his thought in different ways. So he gave me the idea there's this Heidegger's Children, and you could do something like Soloveitchik's Children. So I said, all right, yeah, that sounds pretty good. That's a pretty catchy title. And so that kind of maybe answers the question about the genre of the book and why something has never been done like this before. It has in other areas of philosophy, but I don't know about Jewish philosophy or Jewish thought if something like this has been done before.
Thank you. Yeah, that's
yeah,
and piece of advice from your advisor.
Yeah,
What a great piece of advice from your advisor.
yeah, it really was. He That's why I say in the introduction to the book that this book would not exist without him, at least not in the same form, because he is the one who had the idea to expand it to different students, and then why Jonathan Sachs and why David Hartman, that came in a bit later. That's where the
Yeah,
seed
so
of
I wanted to follow up on that, I guess, and ask. So you chose Yitz Greenberg because you heard him at YCT, and I know in the footnotes, many of the much of the material from Rabbi Greenberg is based on lectures he gave at YCT. Um, so I guess I'm wondering in general, what makes in your mind what makes someone a student of Rabbi Soloveitchik to the point that they would rate. You had Yitz in mind, so how do you choose David Hartman and Jonathan Sachs as the other two?
Yeah, this is one of the most common questions I get on the book from people who know the Rav and his Talmudim, because he's had so many Talmudim, he's had so many students. He ordained thousands of rabbis, and he's responsible in many ways for the culture of Jewish thought and modern Orthodoxy in America, and now beyond, the way that Rabbi Hartman has gone to Israel and others as well. So why just these three? So my thinking on it was, I'm interested, for my purposes as a scholar in Jewish thought, on Jewish thinkers and theologians specifically, and how they, as serious Jewish thinkers, looked at Rabbi Soloveitchik as a Jewish thinker as well, as a theologian as well, and adopted as well as adapted Rabbi Soloveitchik's theologies into their own philosophies and theologies. Sometimes literally, but other times, more interestingly for me, creatively, in ways that looked like departures from Rabbi Soloveitchik's teachings. And so rabbis Greenberg, Hartman, and Sachs were three of the most prominent, I believe in my mind, the most prominent modern Orthodox Jewish thinkers who were, and with Rabbi Greenberg, still are serious Jewish theologians in their own right, who also interpreted Rabbi Soloveitchik in novel and surprising ways.
So I want to get to those surprising ways. I just want to note for everyone listening that's interesting, and we don't have to get into this, it's in the book, that the only person of the three who are Soloveitchik children's book who actually sat and studied at the feet of Rabbi Soloveitchik was David Hartman, right? Rabbi Sachs was in England, and Yitz Greenberg was more of a colleague slash student. They were both on the faculty at Yeshiva University, I think, at the same time. And Rabbi Greenberg never formally studied with Rabbi Soloveitchik, although did correspond with him a great deal, as you note in the book. So that's also interesting that in the modern day, you could be a student of someone by reading what they've read and then interpreting it in your own writing, even though you haven't sat with them. And I'm also, and some people would probably then say, well, that makes, maybe they would quibble with whether or not they're actual students or not. But maybe you could now give us some highlights as to where Rabbi Greenberg, Rabbi Hartman, Rabbi Sachs sort of built their own theology in whatever specific area you think is most interesting for each of them on the foundation of Rabbi Soloveitchik, but and then in turn broke with him on those issues.
Yeah, and that really gets into the heart of the book. Though I did want to say on Rabbi Greenberg, never formally studying with him, it's it never formally sat at his feet in the way that Rabbi Hartman did. Although he learned with him to a much closer level than Jonathan Sachs did for sure. In the case of Rabbi Sachs, his Rebbe-Talmud relationship, his student-teacher relationship with him was very much one of pretty much mostly reading him from afar and absorbing him that way. Although he did have a couple meetings with him that were very important for him, very formative for him, as I discussed in the book. But with Rabbi Greenberg, it's really, he's the Goldilocks figure in that zone. He's in between, because he did really, even though he was technically on the faculty together with Rabbi Soloveitchik for a period at YU, at the same time, he also made Rabbi Soloveitchik, in the terms of Pirkei Avot, Aseh Lecha Rav, he sought out Rav Soloveitchik and he made him his Rebbe. He put himself under his influence. He went to his shiurim. He couldn't attend his daily Talmud shir in the way that the undergrad and YU Smicha students did, but he really went out of his way to go to his classes, to try to get advice from him whenever he could. So that's maybe kind of an in-between example. Right. Yeah, and he did become quite close with him. And that relationship that they had led to and informed maybe one of the great highlights of going to the question of what are some of the highlights of how they interpreted Rabbi Soloveitchik in creative ways and in ways that shaped their own theologies. With Greenberg, that might be in the area of Judaism's relations with other religions, and especially on if and how we can have theological dialogue with people of other religions. And this is now something that I think, at least in the modern Orthodox world, we kind of take for granted. Maybe not everyone, but just the fact that we can sit with Christians and people of other faith and have discussions about religion with them, and get together in good faith, no pun intended, on these matters. A lot of us have come to accept this, but in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, when this new development in Judaism's relations with other faiths was being developed in the Orthodox world by Rabbi Greenberg, principally among others, this was a very new and somewhat startling thing. Rabbi Soloveitchik, some of you might know, one of his most famous essays is an essay called Confrontation, where in response to some of what had been going on in post-World War II and with dialogue between the Vatican and leaders of the Jewish community, and like Abraham Joshua Heschel, for example, Rabbi Heschel was active in those early stages of Jewish-Christian relations. There was some talk about whether it would be permissible for Orthodox Jews to do this, and Rabbi Soloveitchik came out with an address and then a statement saying pretty much no, at least on a theological level, to have theological dialogue. I said, yes, you can cooperate on levels of civic affairs and things that are important for the community, but you should not have any discussions on faith and theology. And he gave different reasons why, but Rabbi Greenberg, who is my teacher in Jewish theology, my Rebbe in Jewish theology, when I asked him about this episode and how he was able, or how he felt he should break with his Rebbe on this point, he talked to me about how he went to Rav Soloveitchik and he said, Rebbe, what you said about Jewish-Christian dialogue, it seems to go against your own principles, because you're someone who believes that everything should be dictated by halacha, not just matters of Jewish law, but even matters of Jewish thought and Jewish thinking as well. And your rationale for why you prohibited Jewish-Christian dialogue seems to not be grounded in halacha. It seems to be coming from other areas, other reasons. And Rabbi Soloveitchik, according to Rabbi Greenberg, conceded to him. He said, yeah, you're probably right. And if you want to do it, if you want to have Jewish-Christian dialogue, goes into hate, you can go ahead, but it's not something that I'm going to permit for everyone. And then they continued this conversation. Rabbi Greenberg told me, and it said to the Rav, well, if you're saying this to me here now, why don't you say it publicly? Which is probably the question that you have for me. Like, why didn't Rabbi Soloveitchik say any of this publicly? And he never really got a clear answer on that. I got some answers to that, but the Rav could be mysterious sometimes. But the reason that Rabbi Greenberg felt that he could engage in theological dialogue with Christians, and really this led to him becoming one of the pioneers of Jewish-Christian dialogue in the Orthodox world, grew out of some of the teachings of his Rebbe himself, of Rav Soloveitchik, on how if everything should be governed by halacha, including matters of Jewish thought and Jewish policy, well, then if there are permissions within Jewish law, within halacha, to have this dialogue, then why not go ahead and do it? So that was one example of how Rabbi Greenberg, he relied on Rabbi Soloveitchik's own teachings to innovate in areas that Rabbi Soloveitchik himself did not innovate in, which I believe one of my theses, if not my main thesis in the book, is that many of these breaks of Rabbis Greenberg, Hartman, and Sachs, many of these breaks that they had with the Rav's teachings grew out of the Rav's teachings themselves. For Rabbi Hartman, this, I think, could be, this manifests itself. You see this in Rabbi Hartman's whole philosophy of covenant, which if you're familiar with Rabbi Hartman's thought, covenant is a big theme, major importance in his Jewish philosophy. It is with all of them as well, to different degrees. Rabbi Sachs, Rabbi Greenberg, and Rabbi Hartman all have different conceptions of what the brit, what the covenant means in Judaism, why that's so significant. For Rabbi Hartman, I would say the way he explains the nature of the covenant, I believe, is drawn out of Rabbi Soloveitchik's teachings, in the multifaceted covenant. It's not just a one-part covenant. It's, for Rabbi Soloveitchik, it's a two-part covenant, which is accurate, which is reflective of Rabbi Soloveitchik's own penchant to double things, to see many things in, as Sfei Dinim, if you know the Brisker term, the two aspects to many things. So, and this is also something that you see in Rabbi Greenberg's thought as well. The idea that there are two parts of the covenant, and this, for both of them, Rabbi Greenberg and Rabbi Hartman, in my belief, led to their innovation in Jewish thought of extending the privileges of the covenant to non-Shomer Mitzvot Jews as well, to non-from Jews, to secular Jews, to say that, well, if there's this other part of the covenant where non-Jews or non-religious Jews are just as equal members of this relationship with God as our religious Jews, then we should be able to extend the other aspects and other privileges of the Brit, of the covenant, to them as well. If this is a little difficult to understand, I know this is maybe one of the more complex aspects of their thought. I walk it through more step-by-step, more of a step-by-step development in the book, but I'm just giving a brief nutshell introduction to it now. But there's a lot more on that topic there. And then for Rabbi Sachs, I would say one of the highlights is, and this I think is really significant, his theological reaction to the Shoah, to the Holocaust. And this is also part of the heart of the book too, one of the central chapters of the book. Rabbi Soloveitchik, one of his other major essays and major addresses concerns the reaction to, theological reaction to the Holocaust, and at the same time, concomitantly to the birth of the state of Israel. Kol Dodi Dofek, the voice of my beloved is knocking, is the title of that address. Rabbi Soloveitchik is interestingly addressed the Shoah, addressed the Holocaust very minimally in his writings and in his speeches, which maybe you might think is a bit strange for something of such monumental importance in recent Jewish history, that one of the more significant figures in recent Jewish history did not address that much. But in that address, he did discuss it, and even in discussing it in that address, his discussion was more of, you might say, an avoidance in some ways, to say that, well, the right reaction to it is not even to try to think about it philosophically at all, not even to theologize, to philosophize about it. The reaction to it is the way we should be reacting to it is not to be asking why this happened, because we'll never know why God allowed this to happen. Instead, our reaction should be how and what. In other words, how should we respond in our day-to-day lives as Jews and as human beings? What do we do now as Jews who still believe in the Jewish mission, who are still members of the covenant? What do we do to make this world better? And so that reaction of it, to not ask why, which was a non-traditional reaction, because if you any of you are familiar with some of the more traditional Jewish responses to tragedy and suffering, these usually are, since the time of Torah and Talmud on, these responses usually are the kind of responses that we say every day in the Shema, in the second paragraph of the Shema. When we recite that paragraph, the Torah says, if you worship God and follow the laws, the mitzvot, then the rains will come in their proper time, and you'll be rewarded with good agriculture, etc., the things that were important for the people in their day. And if you do not follow the mitzvot, then you'll be met with these punishments. And we say something similar to this regard every Yom Tov when we daven the Yom Tov Musaf. We say, the reason we have galus, the reason we're in exile, is because we sinned. And so for most of Jewish history, the traditional response to suffering is to say, well, why did this happen? It must have happened because of some sin, either some kind of national sin, individual sins, whatever it may be. Rabbi Soloveitchik did not give that response. And that was really significant, the fact that he was a traditional Jewish thinker who was coming out of the school of Brisk, of this great Talmudic dynasty, his grandfather, Reb Chaim of Brisk, started the Brisker method of Talmud study that is used almost everywhere in yeshiva today. His great-grandfather, the Beis HaLevi, also very important Talmudic scholar, and his lineage goes back to figures like the Netziv and Reb Chaim of Volozhin, with names that are royal names in the recent history of yeshiva learning and Jewish thought, and the fact that he was coming from that line of traditional scholars, and he did not give the response to suffering and tragedy that his forebears gave and would have gave. That was extremely significant, and in my mind, that allowed thinkers like Jonathan Sacks to come along and say essentially the same thing, to say that our response to something as catastrophic as the Shoah is not to ask why or where was God, but rather to ask where was man, and where are we now? What do we do now to make the world a better place, to ensure that something like that can never happen again?
Thank you for giving us the three highlights of where Rabbi Sacks, Hartman, and Greenberg sort of jumped off from where the Rav was. I want to give time for people to ask questions. So I'm going to ask you to just briefly, like maybe 2 minutes for each, answer two more questions. One is something you allude to in the book, and that is why do you think Rabbi Soloveitchik never addressed issues of biblical criticism directly? That's the first question. Let's take that sort of like a rapid fire round of that one.
All right, rapid fire. Well, it's ironic because his own response to that was rapid fire, which really raises the question that you have. Why didn't he give more of an extended answer rather than this brief rapid fire answer of, well, I'm just not bothered by biblical criticism, and I've thought a lot about this, and I think it would be interesting to ask a biblical scholar, that's a modern Orthodox biblical scholar, this, because biblical scholarship is not my field. I'm modern Jewish thought, but as someone who's also, of course, interested in Torah and Tanakh and Bible as well, and is familiar with some of the issues of biblical criticism, I'm quite perplexed that he was not perplexed about it, and my only hypothesis, my only guess, is that he was so convinced by the traditional interpretation of where Torah and Tanakh came from that it was just not a shaila for him. It was just not a question.
Okay.
If he felt that strongly. Now, maybe some of you have better answers than I do. That's my best.
I mean, I think he addresses it, I think, indirectly when he talks about Adam 1 and Adam 2.
Yeah.
Suggests that, right, one chapter that the Torah talks in archetypes, and we don't have to assume different authors. We could assume God writes in different styles and different archetypes, and then we figure out how a human being are a composite of those. So I guess that's his, but he doesn't even use in that essay, he doesn't even talk about biblical criticism. It's as if he's just writing a perush on Bereshit without even mentioning it at all, which sort of makes sense with your assumption.
It functions as a response to biblical criticism, whether he intended it to or not, which is the fascinating thing about it, because you could say, well, there are these biblical scholars that are saying that we have these two different accounts of creation. So ipso facto, it must have been written by two different authors, two different branches. And so the lonely man of faith, when he lays out this idea of Adam 1 and Adam 2, it could be read as a response to that hypothesis of biblical critics that no, it's just, as you said, it's the same author writing in different styles for different reasons. You could also say that in some ways, halachic man is his response to the works of Abraham Joshua Heschel in some way, where he doesn't address what Heschel, his contemporary, a very significant contemporary, is doing in Jewish thought, sort of his competitor in some ways. He almost never addresses Heschel directly as well, but in some ways, halachic man is sort of a response to Heschel.
Oh, thank you. Okay, so thank you for that. Now we got to go back. I got to go back and read Halachic Man.
Yeah.
Okay, so one more question before we open it up. If there are questions from the participants, the subtitle of your book is "The Future of Jewish Theology." So I'm wondering if you could. Well, the Rav is obviously has passed away. So has Hartman, and so has Rabbi Sachs. Rabbi Yitz Greenberg is still, thank God, with us, and we are eagerly, I have it on pre-order, eagerly awaiting the publication of his magnum opus, which is going to finally, in one place, provide us with his understanding of the Torah and the messages of the Torah, probably focused, of course, on Tselem Elokim. Who else is doing theology today from a Jewish perspective, traditional perspective? What should we be reading now that there's always more stuff coming out from Rabbi Soloveitchik? Who knows what's still in manuscript? But who else is out there that we should be thinking about in this realm? Not necessarily as an outgrowth of the Rav, but just in general.
Yeah, it's an important question because there are so few, unfortunately, who are doing Jewish theology today, and in my view, which is maybe the biggest reason that I wrote the book. It's not just my fascination with Rabbi Soloveitchik and his students, and which is a big part of my own life as well, of having learned from some of Rabbi Soloveitchik's students in YU, and then learning from Rabbi Greenberg. But it's my own fascination and my own commitment to Jewish theology, which I feel is a really vital and important Jewish discipline. We concentrate for very good reasons so much in our studies in yeshiva, in Gemara, in Halacha. Now there's greater movement even in Orthodox circles to learn Tanakh, which has not always been the case, and Jewish mysticism is growing to be its own area. Scholars of Jewish mysticism, but scholars of Jewish theology and Jewish theologians themselves are at this point. I hate to say it's a dying breed. I feel it's more. It's dormant. We need to revive it again. We need to reactivate it because there have always been. Oh yes, I see someone in the comments brought up Shai Held. He's one of the few out there, I believe, who's really committed to Jewish theology. He's really doing Jewish theology. I was going to mention him. I would also mention Arnold Eisen, who I've had the pleasure to learn a bit from at JTS when he was chancellor there, and now chancellor emeritus. He, I think, in a year, or I don't know the time frame, but he is also going to be coming out with work of his own on Jewish theology. He's someone who's been quite interested in it as well. And Rabbi Greenberg's book, of course, I got to read parts of it when I was at Chovevei. This is going back over 10 years ago when it was manuscript form. He gave us certain chapters, and it's really, it's definitely a magnum opus, but also it's going to portray how, in his view, every mitzvah, every deed in Judaism flows out of the imperative of choose life. Some Elokim as well as the V'charta B'chaim. So my hope for writing this book is that this would inspire people with to get really interested again in Jewish theology as its own unique and viable discipline, whether in Jewish academia, where the focus tends to be more on areas like Jewish history and Jewish philosophy and things like that, and also in the wider non-academic Jewish world as well, where at least in the Orthodox world, so much of the emphasis is on Gemara and Halacha, and I think we'd be remiss to forget about the areas of Jewish thought and Jewish life where we're really actively thinking about what does God mean, and what does our relationship with God mean, and Torah and covenant, and the more existential and more difficult questions about belief and questions of these nature, which Jewish thinkers have always dealt with since not only since the time of the Rambam, Maimonides, but even Chazal, even the rabbis of the Talmud dealt with these questions, dealt with what we would call Jewish theology just as much as they dealt with Jewish law and halacha. So I hope this inspires a Jewish future, a Jewish present and Jewish future, where Jewish theology is very active once again.
Thank you so much, Daniel. I'll just note also that Samuel Lebens has a book called A Guide for the Jewish Undecided, which I think probably falls into the category of theology. And there's another book also that recently came, Addressing Questions of Belief, which is interesting to me that, and they're both published by Koren. I can't find the name of the other one, that Koren, which it has published within a few years, 2 books based, I guess, on Jewish theology for people who are having questions of belief. And maybe people are more willing to talk about that now, or maybe that's just Koren's vibe.
I would also recommend 2 more that are maybe not Jewish theology per se, but they deal with Jewish theology very substantively by 2 really terrific contemporary scholars. One is Mark Shapiro's book on the Rambam's 13 Principles of Faith. Some of you may know that. And Menachem Kellner's book, I believe, is titled Do Jews Have to Believe in Anything, or something? It's got
must the Jew believe anything? Must the Jew
believe anything? Yes. Very, very good books on Jewish theology by modern scholars in the field. But in terms of getting people to want to be Jewish theologians themselves, I hope that people will take that up.
Okay, thank you so much, Daniel. I would love to open up the floor, so to speak, to folks who have questions. Feel free to put them in the chat, or just unmute yourself and fire away. For those who have not checked the chat, I have links in there to the discount code from the University of Alabama Press for Daniel's book. I also put a link into the essay Confrontation that Daniel referenced, where Rabbi Soloveitchik sort of put a ban on interfaith theological conversation. I also put a link to Kol Dodi Do Fake, which is only $3.68 on Amazon, which is Rabbi Soloveitchik's response to the Shoah and the establishment of the State of Israel. I also put a link to Shai Held's book, Judaism is About Love, which is really, really wonderful as well. So check out those links and build your Jewish library. And okay, who has questions? Go ahead and unmute yourself. I see people have moved their face closer to the screen, but no one's asking anything.
I would just add one more before your question in terms of modern Jewish theologian, a real theologian who writes on Jewish theology. He's no longer with us, unfortunately, but the books of Rabbi Neil Gilman, who is also a very important figure in my life as well. Rabbi Gelman, Zichrono Livracha. They're all wonderful, especially Sacred Fragments, and a book like The Death of Death, where he deals with the resurrection. Um, his last book, yeah, those are terrific.
I guess there's also Eliezer Berkovitz, who is no longer with us either, but also was a theologian.
Yeah, and a contemporary of Rabbi Greenberg's, who kind of got to some of Rabbi Greenberg's ideas before he did, even though Rabbi Greenberg claims that he gave Rabbi Berkovitz the idea.
Interestingly, I
Yeah.
learned recently that Rabbi Berkovitz and the Rav were in Boston at the same time, and they had no interaction with each other,
Hmm.
which is interesting.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay.
I have a
Go ahead,
question.
Blake.
So I was wondering what you think about the potential durability of Rabbi Soloveitchik's ideas, and among his students, who are the most influential, and not just in terms of themselves, but in terms of carrying Rabbi Soloveitchik's ideas into subsequent generations. And
Yes.
I asked partly because you mentioned that some of his, as is natural, some of his students or proteges kind of innovated, from his ideas. But do you see him, nobody's like Maimonides per se, but do you think he'll have, is he like, what's his level of influence for his generation, I guess?
Yeah, it's a great question, a great 2 or 3 part question. But it's ironic that you mentioned no one is like Maimonides, which is 100% true. Although in the whole debate of like if anyone is a basketball or sports fan here and grew up watching Michael Jordan, and we always say, well, who's the next Jordan, or is this guy the next Jordan? Well, there will never be another Michael Jordan, but maybe there have been players who have come close. Maybe it's Kobe Bryant, maybe, but Rabbi Soloveitchik arguably is a contender for who has been the closest to a figure like Maimonides, because he is someone who, like the Rambam, like Maimonides, was an expert in both secular philosophy, the philosophy of his age, as well as a master of halacha and Talmud, which is a very rare combination, and as innovative and also influential in the way that Maimonides was as well. That gets to your question about how influential will he be, but it's not a coincidence that that's why Rav Soloveitchik named the school that he founded in Boston Maimonides, because that was very much his model, and that was the model in many ways of Judaism and Jewish learning that he was trying to encourage. And the question now is, how durable, as you asked, is that model going to be? Because in the Orthodox world, there's sort of been a bit of a schism between the right and the left, if you want to get into the sociology of it, in terms of how Rabbi Soloveitchik's different branches of students took his thought. The ones on the right, the ones that could be termed more halachocentric or neo-Haredi, or there are different terms that sociologists give them, or what we might call his more yeshivish students, whatever term you want to use. Those students became the dominant force in terms of the interpretation of his thought and how to perpetuate his legacy. And those are the students who are carrying the day in YU and in most of the center and center right modern Orthodox world. And then on the left, you have Rabbis Greenberg, Hartman, and that branch of Rabbi Soloveitchik students who are trying to keep the Maimonidean model going, whereas the more yeshivish students and inheritors of his legacy are looking at the Rav as more of a traditional Rosh Yeshiva, a Talmudic master, which he very much was. They sometimes downplay, intentionally or not, how committed he was to secular learning as well, and incorporating those kinds of teachings into the heart of his own Jewish thought, which itself is really quite an innovative thing if you think about him in comparison to people like the Beis Halevi and Rav Chaim of Brisk and the Chaim of Volozhin and some of the people he came from. But whether the Maimonidean model of Rabbi Soloveitchik, the philosopher plus Rosh Yeshiva model, can be continued, can be durable, I think that's very much an open question, because that's in the distinct minority of who his students are right now. I think there will always be people in the Orthodox world who want that, who want to be able to have both traditional yeshiva style learning and commitment to halacha, with openness to the modern world, with an engagement with secular learning. But that seems to be in minority now in the at least the center and center right modern Orthodox world. So it's an open question. We'll have to see in the next decades or so how this plays out. But and I think the third part of your question was, who do I see as his most influential student? I talk about this a little in the book, but I believe Rabbi Sachs, Lord Sachs, Alav Hashalom, right now is still the most influential Jewish thinker in maybe arguably for all denominations, not just in Orthodoxy, which is the really rare quality of him, that he is someone who is so accepted by Reform, Conservative, and Orthodox Judaism. And I think that speaks to the beauty as well as depth and relevance of his thought, and how embraced he's been in America, not just in England, but all over the world. I think he's the most influential figure in the Jewish world right now, even several years after his death.
Thank you.
Yeah, I agree. I think he's probably also the most influential among non-Jews too.
Yes.
All right,
I have one more question. If
Uh,
nobody else has one right now.
Brian, did you have a question? Hold on one second, Blake. Sorry.
Yeah.
I thought Brian was unmuted,
Yeah.
so I'll come back to you, Blake. Is that cool?
Yes, I put a somewhat trite question in the chat earlier. But Lahavdil, was the title of your book influenced at all by the title Rashi's Daughters, a book of a very different type of book?
It actually was not, although it's arguably in that genre as well. The title of my book, I don't know if you were here because when we began, because this is what we began with, but I give all the credit for the title to my doctoral advisor, Alan Middleman, who got it himself from the book Heidegger's Children, which is about how the students of Martin Heidegger interpreted his philosophy, and why it worked so well for me. And I felt it was the perfect title was because, well, in Heidegger's Children, that maybe was more of a cute kind of title. It's like, well, these are not really his children, they're his disciples, but in some ways they're like his children because of how closely influenced they were by him. But in Jewish thought and Jewish theology, and this is I have this as the epigraph to my book, the passage from the Gemara, from the Talmud, that says that if any kol hamelamed bino shalach, anyone who teaches another's child Torah, the Torah considers it as if he gave birth to that child. And then the Shalah, later Jewish thinker, little post-medieval Jewish thinker, comes in and says, you might think that this should be taken figuratively, but the Shalah Kadosh says, no, this is actually literal, because the parent gives the child the body, but the Rebbe, a teacher, gives the child the soul. So it really is as if when you teach someone else Torah and you become someone else's Rav, you're becoming that person's parent. So the idea of Soloveitchik's children is really, according to the Shalah, a literal concept. These are his literal children. They have his soul, just as parents give children the body, the Rav gave his students their soul.
That's beautiful. Thank you. Okay, back to you, Blake.
Okay, you mentioned that Rabbi Soloveitchik was basically disinterested in source criticism. Was he equally as disinterested in the kind of like harmonization of science and Torah that some people are into, like, what's his name, Gerald Schroeder, or even R.E.A. Kaplan had like an essay about that. Did he ever pay any attention to that?
He did slightly more than biblical criticism, not to the extent as the others that you mentioned, not to the extent of Rabbi Sachs, for example, who wrote a whole book about it, which, in my opinion, is one of his best books. If you haven't read it, Jonathan Sachs's book, The Great Partnership About Science and Religion, is one of his top 2 or 3, my view. But Rabbi Soloveitchik talks about it a bit in his most complex work, Halachic Mind, some of the relationship between science and philosophy. And in The Lonely Man of Faith, he has a few passages where he discusses some applications of his thought to how we look at developments in modern science. It's one of the topics that I wish that he addressed more in depth, just like biblical criticism or even the Shoah. There was one more point I wanted to mention on the previous question that you had about durability of Rabbi Soloveitchik's thought and legacy. The other thing about it, I think, that's going to make it a difficult legacy to perpetuate, at least in a popular sense, is because his thought and example is difficult. It's intellectually demanding. Spiritually demanding as well, to some extent, but it's a very intellectualized and intellect-centered Judaism, and that can be a hard kind of Judaism to make popular. There are always going to be people in Judaism who are going to be interested in a more intellectual approach. But generally, the Jewish thinkers who tend to be more influential tend to win more adherents are thinkers like the Rebbe, for example. I mentioned one of the Rav's important contemporaries, Rabbi Heschel, Abraham Joshua Heschel. To the left, and another very important contemporary, arguably to the right, is the Rebbe, Lubavitcher Rebbe, who leaves an important legacy as well. The Rebbe himself was quite a sophisticated thinker and very intellectual in his own right, but his brand of Judaism, so to speak, is not as intellectually grounded. It's not as intellect demanding as Rabbi Soloveitchik's is. And that's why I think Chabad, one of the reasons Chabad has been so successful and so popular, is because it's not as intellectually demanding in the way that Rabbi Soloveitchik's is. I don't mean, when I say it's not as intellectually demanding, I don't mean that as a pejorative. I don't mean to put it down in any way. I just mean by way of comparison and contrast and trying to give an accurate description. But I think that's going to be one of the factors in play and how durable and Rabbi Soloveitchik's legacy is.
Well, I do find his books hard to read, especially compared to Rabbi Sacks. But it's funny, I read an essay that Rabbi Sacks wrote when he was much younger, and it was extremely complex and very difficult to read. And I think that he trained himself to write in a more popular style or easier to understand style. So let me ask you, what's the easiest Rabbi Soloveitchik book to read?
Yeah, that's like asking what is the easiest Ingmar Bergman film to watch. I don't know, that's a hard one. Yeah, I have to think about that for a moment.
I mean, maybe they're all hard, so
they all are hard, I think, but some are harder. Even like halakhic mind is very hard work because you need such a background, not just in Jewish thought, but in philosophy, secular philosophy, philosophy of science as well. All these different disciplines. Like there are some that are very hard. Confrontation is a hard essay. Kol Dodi Dofek, The Voice of My Beloved Knox, which is the one of the essays that Rabbi Gelman put in the chat or the link, his response to the Shoah and the state of Israel. That's a bit easier by comparison. I think I would recommend that one. He has an essay, one of his most underrated essays, which is a bit more accessible, is called Majesty and Humility, where some of his most important ideas are laid out. I actually think, though, that halakhic man, not halakhic mind, but halakhic man could be his most accessible. I think that one might have the most popular sway. Probably also my personal favorite. Yeah, it's a good comparison and contrast you make between him and Rabbi Sacks, because you could see it. Rabbi Sacks early on in his career, he was writing like Rabbi Soloveitchik. Because he was so influenced by him early on in his life as a Jewish scholar, as I discussed in the book, several of his first articles on Judaism, Jewish thought, were just about Rabbi Soloveitchik alone. So he's kind of trying to model himself clearly as a thinker on Rabbi Soloveitchik, but then later on, as he became less grounded in the world of academia and was moving more towards being a popular rabbi, a rabbi for the masses, he definitely did simplify his style and in the way that we're the beneficiaries of today.
I would add that I think some of the more recent stuff published from the Rose manuscripts, like on Tefillah and on the holidays, are, because they don't require this expertise in all of Western philosophical tradition, are much more accessible. And Blake, if you want to touch base, I could direct you towards towards some of those. I just put in the chat the link to Majesty and Humility, as well as the link to the RCA's archive of everything Rabbi Soloveitchik wrote in their journal Tradition. So that's also a good place to start. It's a rabbinic journal, but it's a popular journal. It's not an academic journal. But I think the stuff on tefillah and holidays that have come out in recent years, there's a book on Abraham, another one on Moses, are easier. The prayer one probably also just touches on Rabbi Saleh more broadly on his ideas than those others do as well. Okay, yeah. All right, before we just say goodbye and thank you, any other comments or questions? Okay. Well, thank you so much, Daniel. This was really a treat for us. I'll go back. I'll end where I started, which is you should all read the book. It's really great, and it is a great discount on the University of Alabama Press. It is cheaper than it is on Amazon, so I recommend that. And if you do read the book, let's chat. And let us know when your next book is going to be ready, Daniel, and we'll see if we can get together again for another conversation.
Yeah, that would be terrific. This was a real treat for me as well. I love talking Jewish thought and Jewish theology. It's a real passion of mine, and a pleasure for me to be able to share some of this passion with you. And I hope you're inspired as I am about the future of Jewish theology in America and beyond. I look forward to hearing your thoughts about the book. Please let me know what you think of it, if you have any further questions. And I hope to see you all again, God willing.
Great. Thank you so much, Daniel. And thank you all for joining tonight's talk. And hope to see you all soon.
Thank you.
Night.
Thank you.